You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. My guest today is Tara Goodwin. Tara is a lifelong entrepreneur, founder of Goodwin Consulting, and co-founder of Crisis Interception, Inc. She brings more than 3 decades of experience to her consulting practice and is an expert in crisis communications, media relations, digital media, crisis and presentation training, strategic events, and content development and curation. Tara has represented a wide range of clients from professional athletes and coaches, including Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, to celebrities, high-profile CEOs, religious leaders, and politicians. For the past 7 years, Tara has been an international speaker and recently celebrated the release of her first book, Manage the Message, Change the Outcome, an executive's guide to crisis management. Tara, welcome to the show.
Kristen, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really happy to have you here. I'd like to start with a little bit of kind of origin story. So take us back and share with us how you got involved in PR and communication.
I actually was an accidental PR practitioner. I used to work in state government as a press secretary and then a chief of staff. And a young woman who worked for me was hired away by Edelman, a global PR company. And they had opened a Boston office in the early 2000s. And she called me one day and said, "I need a boss." And I immediately said, "I don't know a thing about PR." She said, "You know everything about PR and you know everyone in government. You have great contacts. That's what they want." So I jumped over and got hired and became her boss and was taught how to do public relations by Richard Edelman, who is the CEO of Edelman and still is today.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then you, at some point, made the jump into entrepreneurship as well. So tell us about kind of what inspired that and maybe what, as I know, there are many lessons you learn when you start your own thing.
100%. 9/11, when the tech bubble burst and the World Trade Towers were hit, Edelman lost many clients that were in the towers. Wow. The CEO was dealing with economic conditions and made the decision to close 5 of the smaller Edelman offices, and Boston was on the chopping block. And he called me to let me know this news. I was pregnant with my youngest son at the time, and he said, "I'm not coming back to Boston. If you want to take the clients that you won and start your own business, I think you're smart enough. I think you're great. I'd love to see what happens." And I had never thought about that until that moment. And I was thinking, could I possibly do this? So I started in an upstairs bedroom in my house, and that was 25 years ago.
Wow. As someone who's currently recording from an upstairs bedroom in their house.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I find it very relatable. Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of carried you through to sort of another transformation in another moment of crisis, which I think is going to be a recurring theme today during the pandemic, right?
Yes. And then during the pandemic, we had a situation. The only good news is we were really prepared because I had a young team and they wanted to work remotely. And this was before the pandemic hit. Yeah. So they asked me to trade all of our hardwired computers for laptops. And, they said, "We want to go work in a cafe. We want to go work at home. We want to go do this." And so we said, well, we'll try it out and see how it works. But the good news was, once the pandemic hit, we didn't miss a beat because we were all communicating that way for several, months at the time. So it worked out pretty well. But we then had the president of my company who made the decision to leave with one of our ex-clients. And so it was me and my office assistant, and I had to start and rebuild from ground zero.
Yeah. It's, I know the pandemic caused a lot of shifts and some growth, but certainly a lot of opportunity for people to kind of look at what they were doing and rethink, like, where do I want to be headed? We were in a similar situation. Fortunately, I had been working remotely since, before it was cool, I guess. And so that was at least one thing that we didn't have to adapt to. We had folks kind of across the country all collaborating together digitally. And then here you are today. So I want to talk a little bit more about, you've got such a broad range of PR experience. You work with a broad range of clients. When you think about the kinds of folks that you can really help or who really benefit, what kind of characteristics unite them? Is it, I know it may not be a particular industry or type of organization. So what is it that maybe, kind of you're looking for in an ideal client?
That's a great question, Kristen. And I think it's really about a client who wants to learn and who understands that he or she does not have all the answers, and they want someone to help them frame a plan so that if a crisis hits, they are prepared. And it's amazing to me because I have been on the speaking circuit doing workshops with CEOs through Vistage for the past 7 years. And I was startled when I first began the journey because I would ask the question, how many of you have a dedicated crisis plan inside your organization so if the worst case scenario hits you, you're ready to respond? Less than a quarter of the hands went up. Same question about having a dedicated crisis team. Who can you call together to help you navigate through this crisis? Same, fourth of the audience pops their hands up. And I said, well, I'm glad I'm here because if I do my job in the 3 hours, you will leave with the start of a crisis plan that you can implement for your organization.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And that idea of like what you don't know. I wonder, what is it, the idea that a crisis plan is, an insurance policy, and we all kind of view insurance as maybe like, oh, this thing we kind of have to do but we don't want to? Is it the idea that maybe people think a crisis is chaos and that there is no way to kind of control it except for to react in the moment? I wonder, what do you find that kind of underlies this lack of preparation?
Two things. So first, just to be honest, it's not a revenue generating event. So when CEOs look at their financials, they'll say, hey, we could do this next quarter, or we can do this the following quarter, or maybe next year. And they take that can and they kick it all the way down the road. And it becomes something that might be on the wish list, or somebody might bring it up a little bit or say, hey, I went to a seminar and you really should think about this. But most of the CEOs and leaders that I work with will hire me to crisis plan after they've experienced a crisis, and it's completely backwards. So my goal is to change the conversation and tell people the importance of preparing for a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into a little bit more about what the crisis preparation actually looks like. Can you walk us through kind of how that process begins?
Sure. So the first thing that we do is an exercise where we imagine worst case scenarios. We look at risk profiles. What would you think, Kristen, is the biggest fear of CEOs in terms of a crisis landscape right now?
Biggest fear. Is it hacking? Is it being hacked?
Yes, you got it.
Is it?
Data breach, cybercrime. Number one concern of the CEOs that I work with. And most of them have had a cyber event. Yet they still weren't comfortable with the way in which they communicated to the audiences that matter most to them. And that's important. So we look at where you fall in this crisis landscape. And it can be everything from an industrial accident, a car accident, fires, floods, hurricanes, embezzlement, CEO malfeasance. CEOs aren't perfect. We've seen a lot of CEO scandals. We saw one not too long ago up on the Jumbotron, if you remember.
Yes,
right?
I do.
With the CEO of Astronomer. So again, thinking about what could potentially happen. And the other crisis that no one thinks about because no one wants to is their own mortality. What happens if they don't wake up in the morning? Do the employees know what they're doing? Do the managers know what they're doing? One of my colleagues, Nancy Capistran, Nancy, had a client that was a young man, I think he was in his late 30s, dropped dead outside of a Boston Bruins game on the way home. He was working on several deals, but they were all in his head. And she had to work with the team to try to put together a post-secession plan and try to work on saving those deals. And none of that has to happen with a little bit of pre-planning. But we have to talk about the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, as you're even going through the list, I'm thinking it's just that very human side of things. Like, no wonder people don't want to do this, right? And it's something that comes up for me often is this idea that I think in business, we all like to believe that we make really logical decisions and that our actions are guided by the thing that makes the most sense and is quite objective. But in reality, we're ruled a lot by our emotions. And so I can see that this avoidance is one of those examples of like, yeah, you know what, that could wait another 6 months or so. And it's just not as high priority as the things that we're dealing with now.
It's true.
Yeah. So something I want to we're going to spend a little bit more time on some of the crisis pieces. But I do want to touch on thought leadership. So for listeners, Tara, you and I have partnered together in the past. We had an opportunity to work with you on your thought leadership. And I think that you've got a particular point of view that's really forward looking on this. So many comms folks are the people in the background, right? They're the people behind the people. And I think in some ways, all of us are somewhat comfortable in that role. But you, for a long time, have had the view that you needed to be building your own brand and putting yourself out there. So with some of that thought leadership we've worked on together on social media, and even most recently with your book, can you talk about that philosophy and maybe how you see it kind of fitting into the landscape today in particular?
Sure. I mean, I do think that thought leadership is a very important part of being a leader, getting your message, getting your thoughts out. My issue, Kristen, as you well know, was for the past 3 years when we were working together, I was so busy doing that for all of my clients and getting them these fabulous placements. When it came time to do my own, I was too tired. I was like, I don't have time for this. So, what does a leader do when either they have skills, but they can't utilize them because they're using their skills for someone else, or they don't have the skills in a particular area? They outsource to another exceptional company. And that's what I did with you and your team. And I loved it because I would come to you with ideas. You did a great job preparing me, coming up with concepts and ideas. And so we knew exactly what we were going to talk about. You didn't waste any time. We dove right into it. I talked to you like I can talk a dog off of a meat truck for sure. So, but I had all of these thoughts and ideas, and you and your team were able to take them and consolidate them. But not only that, sound like me. And that was incredibly meaningful. And I know there are a lot of people out there now who can say, well, I could do that with ChatGPT. And the answer is you could do some of it with ChatGPT, but you can't be 100% authentic. And that's what you helped me do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, certainly for us, even taking that kind of AI metaphor, like you hear a lot that garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data. I like to think of it with a little more positive spin, but when we work with great ideas in, great content out, kind of a thing. And so that's something we always really, felt when we were working with you. Can you talk a little bit about how that idea of visibility, which I think is really important for founders right now? There was a period several years ago where we were working with a lot of people who very much wanted to separate themselves from their companies. And there was a lot of like, I don't want to put myself out on LinkedIn because I don't want people to think I'm the one who's going to work on their projects. And I don't want to be too forward. It should really be the brand that's out there. And I think we're seeing a bit of a shift now with that, where there's a lot more founder-led brands, not just for small companies, but for big ones too. Can you talk about how maybe that's impacting PR and maybe your own decision to publish a book?
I think leaders are an important part of leadership is letting people in on who you are and what you do and what you think. I also think you have to protect your brand, but people are looking to the leaders to define all of the elements of that brand and what they're doing with it and the direction that they're taking it. They want to believe in something, which is the brand, but they also want to believe in the leader behind it. So I think that smart leaders today are taking opportunities for thought leadership, for serving on panels, for going out and speaking, or doing just even customer town halls where they sit down and have a communication with their customers and the people who matter most to them. And I do think that that's a critical piece because in this day and age, it's very individual focused as well as brand. So you really have to make sure that you're aligning yourself with your brand and getting your message out so that people can easily identify who you are.
Yeah, it's really putting the ideals of a brand into action, right? Is by what the people behind it are doing, what they're saying, how they're kind of living a living embodiment of that. Um, One other thing I wanted to ask you about is there has been so much change, AI. But I think not just AI, right? Like we've seen this real shift in marketing in particular, where there's been sort of an increasing emphasis on data and ROI and attribution and results. And that's been, it's been something we've had challenges with in some cases. And I know broadly in PR, because what we're talking about is a lot of work that contributes to reputation and affinity and things that are hard to quantify on a spreadsheet. And then you have AI come in and that's sort of upending. Now there's more emphasis on earned media and, oh, maybe this is the way to be found in AI search results. So can you just talk a little bit about how you kind of navigate that landscape and how you kind of help set expectations with clients?
It's a great question, Kristen, and there's no one way to do it. There are so many different metrics you can get lost in the data. The question that I ask my clients is, what is most important to you? Is it growing your presence on social media? Is it being seen as a thought leader? Is it being quoted in high-end journals or magazines? What is it that you truly want from this engagement? Because once we have those target points, we can design a program that actually works. If we're trying to do too many different things, it's never going to satisfy you. So that's part of the deep dive that we do. And then we can measure metrics once we identify what they are. But again, there are so many different metrics. It's very, very difficult to say, well, I just want it all. I'll know it when I see it, and it's like, no, we need to be a little bit more specific about that. If I ask you to close your eyes and tell me what success looks like to you from PR, is it being in the New York Times? Is it being in the Boston Globe? Is it being in the Boston Business Journal? Or are you more interested in having speaking opportunities where you're in front of like audiences and can build your brand that way? So those are the kinds of conversations that we have. And then we design the program that actually fits what they truly want.
Yeah. Do you find yourself having to push back if they say leads? I want leads.
Yes. I want my phone to ring. Well, we all want our phone to ring. There's no question about that.
Right.
So, it's funny that brings me to like a total tangential story. But I remember years ago, I was sitting in a client meeting, and it was a medical device company. And one of the things that I asked their team is, how do you generate business for this product? And they said, may I never leave this chair, we wait for the phone to ring. The CEO's face turned white. He ended the meeting right there, and he went back and fired half of his sales team and restructured because he was surprised at their answer. So again, it's one of those situations where you have to know where your goalposts are. What is it that you're striving towards? And that helps identify the PR plan. And not everything works. It's not linear. Sometimes you have to zig and zag a little bit because you never know how the media and the reporters or the editors are going to react to a particular pitch or an idea. So pivoting is possible, but you still have to have an overall plan. And if a CEO is too scattered and says, I want this, I want this, I want this, I'm more likely to say, well, that's really not going to happen. So maybe we should start here and see if we can get real traction, and then we can get here.
Yeah, I find the same thing. I years ago had a business coach who she was talking about business building, but I think of a lot of what we do in the same way of kind of building things out in layers. And what I've realized is that when companies want to tackle a lot of different things all at once, I've kind of started saying like, look, we're capable of doing that for you, but in our experience, your institution is not yet ready to probably tackle all of those things. And so they're all going to slow down if we do too many of them at once. We need to kind of build the muscle memory for a couple of things. Once that feels stable, steady, not so difficult, then we can add things on. But very often it's companies trying to do something new, and the approvals and accountabilities and reviews and finding time on calendars is so often what slows us down. It's rarely on our side something we've done hundreds of times before, but it's saying like we need to walk right before we can run so that we can be effective.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Curious if you, any kind of trends or shifts in PR you're noticing right now. Like we obviously know, I know we've talked about in the last few years, journalism looks quite different. Reporters have different beats. There are kind of fewer reporters. But anything you're kind of keeping an eye on or anticipate looking different than it has the last few years?
I think companies and individuals and leaders are using more of their own channels to communicate their messages, and that is still continuing. Started during COVID, but it really is growing in terms of LinkedIn posts, social media, TikTok. They're developing their own channels that they can communicate their key messages, and they're not as concerned about the traditional media hits that used to be a huge deal to individuals and CEOs. I think they're much more concerned about their social profile, their presence, the types of interactions that they have with their customers and their brand. It's entirely different. The priorities have shifted, and they're looking at new ways in which to communicate.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So I want to switch now into our big idea. We're going to return to a little bit of a deeper dive on crisis communications. And you said something really interesting before we started recording, which was basically, I'll summarize it and ask you to elaborate, as like the first impression matters, and that it's maybe everything in a crisis moment. So can you tell us what you mean by that?
So how you communicate in the first moments of a crisis really determines the success or failure of the outcome, okay? Because when I first started doing crisis work years and years ago, I would say the first hour, and in fact they had a name for it, they called it the golden hour. As soon as a crisis hits, the clock starts ticking, and you have 1 hour to get all of your ducks in a row and be ready to communicate. But guess what? In the day and age that we live in right now, people can identify a crisis in your company before you even know it's happening. And if you don't believe me, I'll tell you the story of a gentleman that I was talking to who owned a factory that produced tissue paper that goes into gift bags. He learned that one of his plants was burning to the ground on Facebook. He happened to be scrolling through his feed and saw one of his plants with a catastrophic fire. And the truth of the matter was the employee actually posted that video before the fire department was called. True story, can't make this up. This is the day and age that we live in. So my feeling is you need to anticipate what could possibly happen to you or your company and prepare for it so that you are ready to get your message out at a moment's notice. Because if someone else is identifying a crisis in your organization, you're in the unfortunate position of having to play catch up. And no one wants to be in that position, especially in crisis.
Does your crisis planning then include, I imagine, thinking about that chain of communication to begin with, and who notifies who when something like that is going wrong? I mean, to me, that would be where it starts, right? Is making sure that the right people who are going to have to go deliver the messages are notified as quickly as possible.
100%. There's a core team. The team has roles and responsibilities within the team. One of them is named Crisis Team Leader, not the CEO. It's someone who can get all of the disparate pieces together and make sure that they have a plan and the plan is being executed. And the goal in a crisis is to get as much information as you possibly can, make a decision based on what you know at that time, and execute and get it out. And you mentioned the communications chain. I usually recommend that where the crisis starts is where you should start your communication. If it happens on social media, your response should start on social media. If it happens to be a news story, then it would be to the journalist, or you might issue a holding statement to other media as well. If it happens inside your company, you might want to do a memo to employees or conduct a staff meeting.
Okay. Okay. And then tell us a little bit about wherever that first kind of statement, that first messaging happens. Um, what does it look like to do that well? And what are some maybe common mistakes? You mentioned, I don't know if it was before the call or during our recording, defensiveness as a default posture that's maybe not always desirable.
Sure, there are a couple of things. Defensiveness is number one because a crisis hits, you take it personal. It's personal to you. It's personal to your company. We don't do this. This isn't the way that we do business. I want to just go out there and let people know. Well, step back and let's think about how that message is going to resonate with your customers, with your shareholders, with anyone who does business with you. Is that what they want to hear? And one of the questions that no one asks is, what does the average person who is tuned into us and our brand expect us to say or do right now? And you think about that. What would you do if you were outside of that brand? What would you be asking for? And I always say that the CEO should be the spokesperson for the company because I call that the one throat to choke theory. When something goes wrong, everyone wants to see the leader at the top talking about the crisis, letting us know how he or she is managing it and what they can promise us so that we continue to have faith in their brand.
So that is really interesting because we don't always see that, right? We sometimes see representatives and things like that. So you really push clients to bring the head honcho up to be the deliverer of the message.
Almost always. The only time when I would say no would be if they were injured or hospitalized, or worse, if they're on vacation in a tropical paradise and there's a horrible crisis at home. The only thing I want to know, I don't want to see palm trees in the background. I want to know that that leader is on a plane coming home to manage the crisis.
Right.
And
Right.
then having an alternate spokesperson in the meantime. Yes.
Absolutely. What are some things that what are some things people can do, companies can do, especially when information, it's a rapidly evolving situation? I know we had another guest, Kim Callahan Fox, and she talked a lot about transparency and kind of sharing what you're able to in the moment, but recognizing that sometimes information is coming in on an ongoing basis and that there may not be things you want to disclose right away. How do you advise organizations to kind of make those decisions?
Through a holding statement and writing one well. And the holding statement is based on the facts that you have at that particular point in time. But the key elements are to acknowledge the situation. They want to know, the public wants to know what's going on. And then expressing empathy for the individual or individuals if it's catastrophic. And often you will lead with that if it's something very, very serious. Death, serious injury, etc.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that they want to know is, think about how many companies have core values. They put them on their walls, they put them on their website. What are the core values that your company stands for that informs your response to this crisis? The safety of our employees is our number one concern. Our employees and our customers or our family. What is your brand promise that you can weave into this? The next piece is what it is that you're going to do about it. How are you fixing it? How are you changing what's going on inside your organization? And then finally, what commitment, what promise can you make to us so that we feel you're truly on top of it and we can restore our faith in you as a leader and your brand?
Yeah, it's so funny. As you were saying, what are we going to change? We built a policy inside our company, and it's just called When Stuff Goes Wrong. And it is a lot of what you outlined here is acknowledge the situation, apologize if you need to, and I want to come back to that in a second, and then say exactly what you're going to change, and then confirm the thing that you did in fact change. So we are mind
Perfect.
melded on that. Yeah, exactly.
You're
It's great.
crisis ready.
I'm crisis ready. Apologies. That's something I want to talk about. I know when we were working together, we did some features on, several different sort of interesting crises that came up, very public ones. What is your stance on apologies? How do you advise companies to think about that? I know there's some schools of thought that are, no, double down. Apology looks like
Well,
guilt.
you're going to have legal, right? On one hand, you're going to have your either outsourced or in-house counsel saying, don't say anything. And then you're going to have the PR person on the other side saying, we've got to say it. We've got to say it all. We've got to say it all.
Yeah.
These two have to do a mind meld. But honestly, if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt, you are liable. An apology is worth its weight in gold, and it will save you time, it will save you money, and there is no reason not to apologize. Many years ago, I worked for a personal injury firm in Boston, Sugarman, and they showed me a study, and it was done by the American Journal of Medicine. I forget the year, but it showed that if surgeons apologized to patients for accidents that happened in the operating room, they were 40 or 35 to 40% less likely to be sued. Think
Wow.
about that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
Apology is a human response. It takes responsibility and it admits that there was something that was done that was wrong. The American people have an incredible capacity to forgive, but you have to ask for it. And if you don't, you might get in trouble and lose your market share and mind share as a result.
yeah.
And I've seen that happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, even if we just think about that in interpersonal situations, sometimes what's done is done and what we're looking for is, between two people, just that acknowledgement of it and so that makes it easier to move on.
Now, I will tell you that when I go and do these crisis workshops, there are a lot of people who disagree with me. And they say, we
Mm.
will not apologize because that admits liability. And, I think usually in most crises, you can tell whether there is a liability or not. And if there absolutely is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, an apology goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. So for folks who may be listening, whether that is, comms folks within organizations who are thinking like, yeah, our crisis planning isn't quite where it ought to be, or business leaders, what's an action they can take now to move their crisis planning forward, maybe this quarter, and not next year?
I think the easiest thing that they can do is call a meeting together of some of their leaders and some of their managers and sit down and say, let's talk about worst case scenarios. Let's look at the different categories of crisis, whether it happens to be environmental, on the job accidents, a workplace situation, or it happens to be regulatory. We're getting a lot of situations with tariffs right now and communicating to customers. What are we most worried about? What keeps us up at night? And what's interesting is when you bring a team together, and it doesn't have to be a large team, from where you sit is where you identify your risks. So the CEO is going to have a different set of risks than the HR director, than someone who's in IT. They're all going to have their different pain points. But the goal is to look at those, rank them, and then plan for them. And when I say plan for them, think it through. If a lot of people will have risk management plans, so they know the certain people to call if there's an accident, a crisis, and they usually follow that to the T, which is great. But thinking about the human element, that's where I live. How are you going to take that message and share it with an audience so that they truly believe that you are handling this the right way and that their faith in you is completely restored because of the words that you say? And as you know, Kristen, every word matters. And in that holding statement, every single word choice matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important, I think, especially in those kinds of statements, right? To, as you said, consider all of those angles and all of those perspectives. And if there's ever a time to, be extremely cautious while moving quickly, which is one of the challenges, it's in those early communications.
Very true.
Yeah. All right. I want to move us into the last word, which is our lightning round segment. So I ask every guest the same 5 questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. You ready for this?
Okay, I think
All
so.
right. Awesome. Question 1. What's your favorite word to say out loud?
Can I give you 2?
Yeah, you can.
I love gobsmacked. I love
Oh,
the British gobsmacked. It's one of my favorite words. I just love the way it sounds. I love how it characterizes that you're absolutely stunned. And my other one from Crisis is kerfuffle. Again, it's fun to say.
Probably a lot of crises you would rather characterize as kerfuffles, right? It's
I
just got a
wish they
little bit
all
of
were kerfuffles and didn't have to elevate and escalate. That is true.
better than catastrophe, 100%.
Yes.
What's a word you know from reading, but you're afraid to say out loud because you're not quite sure how to pronounce it?
You're going to laugh. I mean, I pronounce it one way and I'm convinced my way is right, but I know that phonetically it's not. Volatile. I say it volatile, but everyone that I know says volatile.
Volatile. I probably say a combo. I would think I say volatile.
There you go.
Somewhere
See,
in the middle.
everyone says that word a little different.
Nice. Question 3. What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Our thoughts and prayers are with the victim and their families. Hate that because it's overused and appears insincere.
Yeah, I agree. Agree. What's a communication hill you're willing to die on?
Don't let anyone else define a crisis in your organization before you have a chance to speak.
And what's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that really stuck with you?
Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, Choose Worthy Rivals. I love this because every one of us is always trying to be better in our business. So look to the people that do what you do who are doing it exceptionally well and think about where your deficits are and how you can get better and surpass them. I love that philosophy.
Nice. I haven't checked it out. This is, I always say this is like my own personal curated list from these interviews. So I'll put that in my queue for sure.
Excellent.
All right, Tara, thank you for joining us today. So if our listeners want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
It's goodwinconsulting.com. And there's a section about me, and you can reach me there or link in with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Kristen.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.